All right. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are continually exploring the landscape of learning tech while cutting through the fluff and getting your questions answered. Today, I'm joined by Laura Chapin. Did I pronounce the last name right? Because I didn't ask before we went live.
Really close, Chapin, but yeah, I answered either
Chapin.
one.
Okay,
We're
see,
good.
there you go. All right. I got that A wrong. All right. Well,
No
anyway.
worries.
And she's from CoachHub. Today, we're talking digital coaching, which I'm actually really looking forward to digging into this more because I posted about it earlier this week. Danny and the Red Thread team had talked about this in an article a while back, that digital coaching is a huge trend. Unless you've been under a rock, you probably know that, but it's a big space and it's a complicated space, and there's a lot more to it than a lot of people realize. So I'm looking forward to getting into that, talking about what coaching is, what the digital landscape looks like, how it can impact your org. We've got a whole agenda planned. I don't know, Laura. I'm pretty excited about it. How about you?
Very.
All right. Well, but before we do,
it's great.
Well, but before we get into it, we got to do the icebreaker stuff because it's important. People need to know who you are, all this good stuff. So let's start with an easy one, which is, where are you? And you told me, but I won't spoil it. So where are you today, Laura?
I am in my home office just outside of Denver, Colorado.
Okay, Denver, Colorado. I was born in Loveland, or actually technically birthed, but lived in Loveland. So beautiful area out there.
It is.
Okay, so you're in Colorado. I'm in Milwaukee, where I always am. So that has not changed. But now you've had time to think about it. Hopefully you didn't forget the other question, which is, I'm curious where you landed on this one. What's a skill you think everyone should have and why?
Well, we were having so much fun chatting before that I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. So I'm going to think off the cuff.
That's fine. You can go off the cuff. That's totally right. Acceptable.
Gosh, it's actually hard to say. I think the first thing that comes to mind is probably not terribly surprising, but is the whole idea of emotional intelligence, right? I think if we really manage self and, in our relationship management, I think that takes us to a lot of places that wouldn't be possible. Okay. Both personally and professionally.
All right.
But the cheesy side of me, the other side of me simply says one skill I think everybody should have is to simply smile at others and help people to feel seen. I know it sounds corny, but it's what we were talking about a while ago, right? Of like how you show up every day. And especially the way things are today, the fact that you can even, get behind outside of a mask and make eye contact, have a human connection. It's a really simple skill, but I have found that a simple smile will start conversations.
That it changes the whole attitude, the atmosphere around you, all that. You know what's funny? I actually like that one a lot because I think sometimes in the skill discussion, we go real ethereal and we use these really big terms, and it leaves people sometimes feeling like, oh, okay, that feels like a lot to take on. But learning how to smile and, just look someone in the eye, simple skill, massive impact. Honestly, massive impact. Okay, absolutely. So mine on this one is similar in terms of a skill that's actually, I think it's a lot harder than people realize. Because initially I was thinking like something around communication, but then I'm like, actually, I like going beneath that, which is listening to understand. I think that is a much harder skill than a lot of people realize, to actually ask questions and listen to what someone's saying and understanding, instead of, okay, I'm listening, winding up to like respond or throw in whatever I have to say to whatever it is. And I think similar to the smile, doing that well, that makes a big impact on even the whole flow, and it affects your communication and everything. So that'd be mine.
Love it.
All right. So let's transition gears. We'll shift gears over. Transition gears. I don't even think that's a thing, but that's fine. So before we talk more about CoachHub, let's talk a little bit about your journey and how you got there. Because if I remember right, you told me you joined in October of last year. But what's you came from Harvard Business Review, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I was at a Harvard Business where we actually in the corporate learning team. So we really focused on leadership and management development. Friend of mine had actually come over to CoachHub and talked about how great it was. And of course, I was naturally curious about the whole digital coaching space. Actually did my coaching certification back in 2008, 2009. Did kind of traditional coaching for a long time, right? Just in person or even over the phone. I ran coaching practices in 3, pretty large Fortune 100s where, it was the whole kind of traditional approach of, vet the vendors, vet the coaches, do the manual matching, do the manual evaluation. And so as I started seeing digital coaching come onto the scene, I have to be honest, Christopher, I was a little skeptical at first a few years ago.
I was going to say, I've talked to a lot of people in the space, and the whole idea of digital coaching is met with different reactions. Let's just say not everybody's like, yeah, this is great.
Yeah. And I think we're in a different place now, right? Like I think most people get it by now, but a few years ago, I have to say, I think partly because I took so much pride in that process, right? And it was so personal. And I really enjoyed
how could a machine possibly
do this, right? Exactly. And it was really hard to envision, but the more I saw it coming to life, and then of course seeing CoachHub's model and some of the stats behind it and how effective it was, I was all in. So that's it. This is such a great, fit to bring, because I have like a little over 20 years of like L&D, OD, talent management, coaching, leadership.
So this wasn't new territory for you.
Exactly. So when you bring all of those together, then coaching just, really making that the main focus of my work and, the reason I get up and, come to work every day, just was a really natural fit.
Okay.
Got it. Been since October.
All right. And it sounds like you're having a pretty good time in the almost 6 months you've been there. So let's talk about what CoachHub is, because if you look at the grid that Red Thread put out, it can mean a lot of different things. And there's a lot of different players, and not all are even in the same space. Like there's categories where they're similar. But so what is CoachHub in terms of how does it approach coaching, and what segment of the digital coaching market does it play in?
Great question. And I love that you're starting there, right? To kind of check some of those assumptions. So we think about
a lot of the audience, they hear it, they're familiar. This is a trend. It's a big boom, but it's like, okay, I may not be as familiar with the nuance.
Sure. Well, I can first share our actual CoachHub definition of coaching. We have, it's informed by
good place to start. That's a good place to start,
right? So it's informed by research and ICF and, multiple research studies. And we have an actual coaching lab where we really focus on the evidence-based approach to coaching, right? What is the science behind it? What do we know? What does the evidence tell us? So I can actually share it. What we, how we define it is it's a partnering process with the client to help them reflect on themselves, the situation, their context, identify insights, actions, ways to unlock their potential, become the best version of themselves. So it's a lot of words, but what comes down to it, right, is it's the relationship between the coach and the coachee of assessing what are your strengths, what are development opportunities, what's driving you, what are your values, what are your goals, and how to be a supporter, a coach, and sometimes, real accountability partner for helping to shift mindsets, behaviors, and do that experimentation. And then, so that's really what we talk about as, coaching. What is coaching?
Yeah.
Digital coaching, right, is really, to me, it boils down to how is it delivered? What's the method? What's the approach? And so digital coaching is still live coaching, right? We're not, for CoachHub and digital coaching, we're not talking about chatbots.
I think that's a really important distinction, because you talked about the coach and the coachee. So there's an actual human involved in the process. It's not a bot.
Right. Exactly. It's live, synchronous conversations like you and I are talking right now, right? With video, audio, having a live conversation. And then there's also where I always say that a lot of the coaching work happens between the sessions, right?
That's when the work actually happens.
Exactly.
You can talk about it all you want.
Applying all that stuff you've talked about. The coach is actually providing exercises or reflection activities, or here's an article or a video or a podcast or a meditation. And they can share those actually through our platforms. That's where the digital piece comes in as well, right? Is not only the methodology of how you're meeting and all the AI matching and things we can talk about behind the scenes. But also that support is digital in between sessions, right? Being able to share those resources. You can send messages back and forth. So there's the whole.
So there's a digital relationship component to it as well. Now, is that digital relationship piece with your coach still, or is it kind of the broader group of coaches?
It's a both and. It's a great question. So the coach is able to send, and coachee are able to send messages back and forth to each other, and learning nuggets from our academy. Like I said, like could be anything from a meditation or an affirmation, a video, an article, an exercise. But we actually, through our coaching lab, it's our internal behavioral scientists and L&D experts and user experience. We've actually created a whole library of resources that then the coachee can actually go in proactively, even without the coach sending it to them. They can browse and say, you know what, I'm curious about, I don't know, emotional intelligence or conflict or whatever it might be. And they can browse those resources and use them real time themselves. So there's that digital learning as well in between the sessions.
And that's all in between. Yeah, no. So I think, just to kind of play it back and then you tell me if I've landed on it, there is the coach relationship, which to me is in some ways, it's a two-way street, but it's in a lot kind of a push of like, hey, I'm trying to encourage, help bring this out of you. Here's some things. But you also, if you're the coachee, have access to this pull resources of, hey, maybe there's areas that I haven't brought up that I want to explore or dig into more. That can you can, I'm assuming, then incorporate that into your coaching journey if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things around coaching, right, we really believe in is the sense of it's highly personalized. We know that people perform best and learn best whenever there's a sense of autonomy. And so that even being able to go in and not only create their own goals, but also, mine for additional resources, supports that sense of autonomy. And we know that that's one of the things that help people learn best and actually change their behavior, right? Change their mindsets over time because they're in control, right? And it's in context and of their actual environment and their day-to-day.
Okay. Well, on that topic, it's interesting. I was reading a research study put out by, I can't even remember who put it out, but it was talking about the age of personalization right now and the expectation of people they need things personalized. The generic one size fits all just doesn't fly. And we mentioned this before we went live. Coaching is really about as personalized. It's about as personalized as you can get, because it's really getting to know who you are as an individual, but then also relational. I mean, there's a relational component. So it's a little more holistic than, hey, we've gathered a bunch of data points about you and they're now pushing you content that's relevant. That's one degree of personalization, but then to be able to do that on a relational basis is huge. So I'm curious the process for matching. And because I'm curious, how the tech has helped augment, you mentioned you were when the digital coaching thing first came out, like, well, how's this going to work? So how do you blend the tech with the human component to help optimize that? Because I've been through this enough to know there's a lot of stuff that, to your point, you may feel like, but there's such a human component to that. That's like, well, actually there's quite a bit of stuff that's very monotonous that AI can help with, so long as there's still a human involved. So where do you draw that line of human in the loop?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And actually, if you don't mind, I think we're talking about the coaching journey. So I'd like to share that maybe real quick in context.
Sure.
And we can talk about this a little bit more later too, but we have an actual holistic coaching model. And that model looks at two different kind of components of our whole selves: grow as a person and inspire as a leader. And under that, then there are 6 core focus areas, and then behavioral areas, subdimensions below that. So we have this framework that we're based in evidence-based studies around transformational leadership and Seligman's PERMA model. So we have this coaching model that is really defining kind of a North Star for coaching. So we orient, and sorry about that. I think we can put that back up.
No, there we go. So we'll bring it back up.
Yeah, sorry about that. We'll go back. So as we are launching the actual coaching engagement with the client, or the customer, right? They're doing communications. We're deciding who's getting coaching. There's a whole onboarding process for those coachees, and helping them understand what is coaching, what is digital coaching, what is coaching not, right? Not mentoring, not consulting.
That's a really, I told you I was going to jump in on this because I think that's a really important component, because not everyone is defining coaching the same. What people think it is, and I've been in orgs where we've had to overcome, there's a real negative association with this sometimes. Like if you're getting coaching, it's because you're not really doing so hot. And so we're going to try and coach you up or coach you out type of a thing that there's a cultural element that you have to overcome with that.
Yeah. And I think it's, I hope, and I'm curious your point of view on this. I feel like it was more performance-based at times in years past. And I think more and more, most organizations have moved towards more of it's a development, technique. It's a development approach to really help you be your best self or your best leader. And actually performance, people, like if it's a real performance issue, a lot of times that's not the best place. And it's usually not the best place for coaching, right? You need to be coachable in order to have effective coaching. So that means really wanting to develop and grow, being curious, being willing to experiment and fail, willing to be vulnerable with your coach, willing to get feedback. So it's actually more when you're in that developmental space that you're going to have the most coaching effective journey.
I agree that we're coming a long ways. Okay. Yeah. I mean, in the conversations I have, I think we've come a long ways. I think, and Eric in the comments mentioned there's still a lot of confusion. And I think there still is. In orgs on a maturity curve, I would say people are on different stages in this, but I think this is something that, speaking to learning or HR leaders, you need to know where you are on that maturity curve, because I have seen orgs go, hey, we're really excited, we're rolling out coaching, without really taking a temperature check on, whoa, what's the atmosphere of what you're doing? And it has sent a message to the org that we're failing and we're hoping to try and bring that up. And they just need to know that, hey, you got to do some work to get in front of that, because you might be unintentionally sending a message that you may not want to. So again, I think it's just knowing where your org is, and then being able to, I think, and that's going back to your journey piece, then being able to make sure in your messaging on the onboarding piece, you're really clear on that, and you may have to do some work on the front end to mitigate that. Otherwise it can be dangerous.
Yeah, 100% agree. I love that you're calling that out. We have to meet the organization where they are, right? And that's where the good change management approach comes in, understanding how is it perceived now? How do we want it to be perceived? What's that gap? How do we need to get that message out? So you can do it at a more organizational level, of course. But then those, like to your point, the people getting the coaching here in this onboarding process, we're going to make sure they're really clear about what this is for, why they've been invited to do coaching. And so they're going to actually come into the platform. And so this gets to your original question. I know you told me like we're going to loop around some different ways. So we're going to
bounce all over the place, and we'll bookmark it and come back to it. So don't even worry about it.
I bookmarked it in my mind too. Coming back to that, where does digital and AI and all that play in? And there's multiple places, but one thing I would say is, so when our coachee, for example, goes in, they've been onboarding, they understand what this experience is about to be like. They go into the platform. One of the first things that they do is actually do a self-assessment against that holistic framework. And it's strength-based. It's really a self-assessment of saying, how do I see myself in these different areas? They get a strengths report that says, here's based on what you've said, here's, what we're showing. And then they, after they've done the strengths report, then they also do the coach questionnaire. So this is their opportunity to answer questions around what are you looking for in a coach? Language, gender, age, industry, a whole host of questions. And then that's actually helping to inform, our system to be able to say, based on what we know, here are coach recommendations. And so what I think is fascinating, right? We were talking beforehand about how, again, my old world, traditionally, that would have taken me as a coach practice leader weeks and weeks and hours to vet and go through all that. The fascinating thing to me now is literally in the platform, the coachee fills out those questions and up pops 3 coach recommendations with their picture, their profile, their background, a video, and the coachee is able to watch them and say, yeah, okay, based on what I just saw, I think I want this coach. They select their coach. the very next step, they go in and book their first meeting.
I want to pause you on this one, though. I want to pause
Yeah.
you on this one for two reasons. One, I think this point of, and this goes to the whole conversation on AI and how the augmentation is really important, is I love how you brought up the fact that as you got into this more, you started recognizing like this administrative stuff used to be just a very burdensome, it wasn't a value add activity for you to sit and, okay, I got to sit and kind of scour all this type of piece. And I think it's helpful because that's not just with coaching. I see the same thing with instructional design. I see the same thing with marketing. I see the same thing with operations, where people look at the machines as, oh, it's taking away the value that I brought. And it's like, well, no, it's actually just taking away a lot of that stuff that used to take you forever. Now you can do it quicker, but you're still involved in that. So I think that's fantastic to hear that. But then I think the other one was, on that coaching piece, I'm curious on this, on the selection and how, if there's some coaching involved in that process, because I think the self-awareness of folks sometimes may not necessarily be where it needs to. So even knowing what they want or what they need, or recognizing their own personal biases, how do you help with that? Or is that something that's part of that process to help encourage them to kind of, hey, we want to go bigger?
In the coach selection process, I think the big is, if that's the piece that you mean, I'll do two things, right? Coach selection and then maybe in their goals. So in the coach selection piece, I think it's really part of that onboarding that we provide when we're talking about what is coaching and what's the difference between that and, say, if you were looking for a mentor, you would be looking for something else. If you were looking for a consultant, it would be something else. But if you're looking for a coach, right? A coach is not the one who's going to come at you with, here's all the answers. I'm going to tell you how to get to point A and point B, and they give you a roadmap, right? And so we really help them understand what to look for in a coach.
That's helpful. That's helpful. So that's actually then part of the onboarding process, is not just what is coaching, but also, hey, you're going to be selecting a coach and ask some questions, but this is what you should be looking for. Because going back to that misunderstanding, people might go, well, I want to look for somebody who's done exactly what I've done, or, thinks exactly like I do, and is just going to kind of pat me on the back and go, great job. Keep up the good work.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So that gets us, all right. See, I told you, we'll come back to it. So we get to that piece. So as part of the journey, they're now matched quickly. It's not, this isn't like, all right, we'll get back to you in 14 days with who your coaches are.
Exactly. Yep. So then they're matched with their coach. They book their initial coaching session. The first time they meet with their coach, it kind of what you would expect, right, is getting to know each other. What are your goals? Let's bring that strength report into the conversation to help choose your focus areas, start your goal alignment, start talking about your values. And the other thing too that's really nice is, if there's another assessment that's used, or a 360, we can bring that into the coaching conversation as well. That's more good data, right? To say, what's the feedback? Where are you today? Where do you want to be? What are those gaps? What are the strengths that we can build on? And they create a roadmap together and start their plan.
Okay. And the content, the on-demand, you talked about this before, the on-demand content, that's all part of it, correct? Like it's all part of the coaching package. Because I think some people think I harp on content a little too much, and I don't know, maybe I do. But to me, I look at it and go, content isn't what drives behavior change.
Right.
But it is an ingredient, and you can't make a cake without flour, but at the same time, a cake with only flour isn't going to rise and it's going to taste awful. So I think that component of that's a key component, it sounds like, as part of that of, well, you may have gaps. And so we also have the stuff to address those gaps, which I guess for organizations who may not have libraries of stuff to pull from, it sounds like that's part of the package, correct?
That's right. Yep. Yeah. And I love what you're saying too, right? Is we know that you can throw a library of content at people, and that's not going to create mindset shift or a behavioral shift. But what I love about having it embedded within coaching is that it's immediately in context, right? It's immediately applicable. It's in context of Like sometimes I think about in the days when I was doing more training, we'd always talk about what's the with them, what's in it for me. What I love about coaching is the with them is immediately clear, right? They're driving it. So whatever it is they're talking about in coaching, whatever resources they're pulling from, those learning nuggets, right? The other thing I like is they're bite-sized, right? They're consumable and they're just in time. So I think to your point, it's not just about being content, but it's content at the right time to either challenge your thinking or have a new perspective, or talk it over with your coach, or maybe take it back to your job and talk about it with your team or your manager. Well,
and I think that I know this isn't specific to coaching, but in many ways it is, because this has ties to the way we think about learning and development as a whole. Because I think more than anything, that's my beef with content, is a lot of times we just provide it to people and say, there you go. And we don't facilitate that opportunity for reflection and application. And without that reflection, application, and collaboration, it really is all for naught. And with coaching, especially in the model you've described and shown, it's all of that wrapped in one, because it's okay, here is something that may fill that knowledge gap, but now you have a chance to reflect on it, get some feedback, apply it, actually then talk about it, collaborate on that. That's actually where behavior change is happening. And I think that's an important consideration, regardless of whether you're addressing coaching specifically or anything as it relates to learning and development.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's one of the ways too, when you think about different use cases, right, for coaching, is it could be just one-on-one and it's just coaching and that's it, right? And that will be effective and can be a fantastic way to drive learning, development, change. Sure. And you can also do coaching, right? It kind of gets to a little bit of what you're talking about in connection with leadership development program, maybe a diversity inclusion initiative, right? So that you're really taking that learning and then how do you apply it? And I know we always go back to the research that shows that that application and actually bringing the learning home, it improves that immensely. And so that your investment that you're making in training then now also has a better return and performs better because now you're actually implementing it, right? There's no lag.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, some of the stuff on here, JD Dillon, he's over at Exonify. We kind of go back and forth and joke about this, that some of these things, it's like, duh. I mean, really, when you're like, well, of course, if you learn something and do something with it, it's going to be far more effective than if you don't ever do anything with it. But so often we miss it. We just miss it, or we get caught up with moving on to the next thing or whatever it is, that we forget that it's like, if we don't be very intentional about what are you going to do with this and then do it, it in one ear and out the other very often.
Yeah. To your point, we all know this. We've known it a long time, but actually putting it into practice and creating the systems within the organization to support it, I think, is the other thing that's been missing, right? Because we also know when you go back on the job, you need manager support. You need to.
It's got to be reinforced. It's got to be incentivized. I mean, it's cheap to talk about it and go, yeah, we really need to do more of this. It's a lot more work to figure out how to do it well.
Right. And I think too, sometimes we think about organizations are sometimes incentivized, quarterly or annually. And when it comes to learning or coaching, because we're talking behavior change, cultural shifts, we have to take the long game, right? We got to keep the end in mind and make sure that we're sticking with it for the long haul, right? Over a period of months. And as you and I were talking about before the session, guaranteed to see results, right? Absolutely guaranteed to see, a shift in your KPIs or your, what's important to you. But it also means you've got to give it a few months typically to start seeing those shifts. And even, sometimes even years, you're going to see exponential returns. But I think that's the thing. We have to keep the long game in mind.
And I think that's an important, we'll talk about considerations. I do really want to spend some time on that, because I think some of the comments that have come in are really important. But I think very quickly, I would just really reinforce that point, that is something that, I mean, the considerations are important, but the long game. And I think sometimes we don't always play the long game. We're looking to play the short game. And will there be some short wins? I mean, you tell me, but I have no doubt that implementing coaching can have some very quick turnarounds on the investment. but the real value is gained over time and the growth is exponential on that return.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say it's a both and. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an either or. So I am curious this, because based on the journey that you're on, two follow-up questions kind of came to mind for me. One is, I'm curious, so it says unlimited coaching, and then there's also kind of the journeys that you go on. What do you see in terms of pattern of behavior? Because I'm curious, how frequently are people engaging with a coach? And is it they just kind of have an ongoing one, or is it more of a chunked journey where they say, you know what, let's focus on this for a period of time, and that takes about this long, and then once we get through that, we move on to another one? What do you see in terms of pattern of behavior?
Yeah, I think it's a great question too. I think part of it depends on the use case. Right. So think about, if you as an organization, maybe where you're focusing on some of your coaching effort is leaders in transition, or maybe people who are transitioning into parental leave and coming back from parental leave, or I know there's programs now. I think this is pretty exciting, just because I think this is fun to think about. I love that some companies are talking about reentry programs, right? Maybe people have been out of the workforce for a while and now they're coming back in, right? There's another transition point. So I think if you think about these key transition points, maybe it's a 3-month engagement, right? That might kind of get them through that transition. And they might meet weekly or every other week, say for 3 to 6 months. And then other efforts, right? Maybe around DE&I or inclusive leadership or general leadership skills or wellness and well-being, you might want to do typically, right, a longer, say 6 months or maybe even 12-month engagement, right? To kind of hit that sweet spot. We do recommend, like you said, it's unlimited. We do recommend at least twice a month, right? Kind of an every other week cadence.
That's what I was curious, cadence. Like, what do you see?
Yeah, that's what you're going to find most people doing, because just if you think about just the competition for our attention, right? Our competition for our time, attention, making time for it. But the good news is they're like 45-minute sessions. You know, we find that that's the sweet spot. And then that also gives you time, goes back to talk about do loops, right? You're talking about that a while ago. We'll do it again. Goes back to what we were talking about, reflection, practice. You need time to reflect. You need time to practice, get feedback on the job, experiment, sometimes fail, see how things go, or experiment and see that it went really well and learn from it. But by doing it every 2 weeks gives you that actual time to put things into practice, and not at such a quick clip that you kind of skip over the learning.
Okay. So there's two follow-up things on that I love that you hit on. One ties to the transitional periods, and I think we can talk more about the use case piece for folks who may be going like, where would we kind of apply this? And Rudy, I see your question, so I'll bring this up because I'd love Laura's take on this one. So I will ask that, Rudy. I promise I won't forget. But is the fact that moments of transition, and there's a lot of research behind this too, is when people are most open to accepting change, right? When they hit moments of crisis or they're in moments of that's when they're really open to it. So again, while I think there's value at all times to be continually coached and get that value, those big moments of, you know, I'm coming back into the workforce, I just had a job change, I'm new to the organization. Those are those moments where people are going, I may have to do things a little bit differently, and I'm open to the feedback and the growth that I may need on that. So I think that's really helpful. And again, I know David James over at Loop talks about this quite a bit. But then the other piece that I think was interesting is the cadence. And that, for folks who may be considering a coaching program or something like this, that is part of I would anticipate as part of the messaging, setting expectations for people to know, hey, we're not telling you exactly how to do it, but these are some best practices. Because if you're only talking to your coach once a month or once every 2 months, there's really not enough frequency. Too much can happen for you really to stay on top of it. If you're meeting every other day, I mean, you could, but that's not really enough time to even apply or reflect or do anything with it. So kind of finding that sweet spot, that's why I was curious where you're seeing the most bang for your buck out of it.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really important too, because even though that cadence kind of might generally, like for example, one of the great benefits I get as an employee, right? I get a coach and I meet with her every 2 weeks. And anytime I'm running up against something that is stressful or hard, or I'm not feeling confident, or, I just needed some additional support, I'm like, oh, wait, I can call Kathy, right? I go into the app and I say, you know what? I know our next meeting's not for, another week and a half, but I'd like to schedule an additional session this week to talk about X. Right. And so knowing that you've got those little like, oh, I need a life raft. I need, I need a
versus a traditional coaching engagement. Again, I'm trying to kind of unpack this for folks who may not have been. A traditional coaching engagement, you might not have that flexibility because it'd be like, I mean, that's not what we agreed to. That's not part of the program.
Right.
I don't have that flexibility. And I just even think as a real life example where you might run into this is, you are planning for a big, I don't know, whatever, some sort of meeting where you're planning on something and it goes nowhere near how you thought it was going to go. And you don't have a 2 week, it's not for 2 weeks. And you go, I need to debrief on this because I don't know what just happened. Where did it go wrong? Like, I just need to talk this through. Having access to your coach to be able to say, can we just jump on and like chat for a bit? Because I just got nuked in this meeting and I need to debrief it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, right, the ways that at least, I can't speak for everybody, but I can say, 10 years ago when I was running a coaching practice, like to your point, the statement of work was very clear, right? X number of sessions, X amount of time, additional sessions would cost extra. And with this model, you really have that just-in-time support to be able to, like you said, figuratively pick up the phone, right? Go to your app, schedule the meeting, and you're good.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think, sometimes that intrinsic value isn't always recognized because if you aren't familiar with traditional coaching models or programs, you may think, well, unlimited coaching, I'm not really seeing where, how many people are really coaching all the time. Like, well, no, it's not about that. It's about having that fluid flexibility. When things hit the fan, you're not going, I'm on my own, which at a time, I know, like, I don't want to wait for 2 weeks to talk about this. I'm dying right now. So to have that flexibility is huge. I mean, it's huge, especially when you look at the research right now on where people are and they are languishing right now in the disruption of COVID, the disruption of work, everything that's going, people are exhausted and they're fatigued and they're having a hard time. So knowing that maybe they don't reach out all the time, but knowing that there is that person that can help support them. I don't think the value of that can be understated, especially in the environment we're in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think about too, like employee experience is really hot right now, right? Like really thinking about how do you attract talent? What benefits do you give? How do you support them at those moments that matter? How do you really differentiate yourself and have that, employee and leader focused lens and then create solutions that help them along the way? And it just makes me think that that's the perfect place to say, well, gosh, what do our employees need? What do our leaders need? And this is such a great way to support people in this really bizarre time that we find ourselves all in. And especially when leaders are burnt out, right? Normally, maybe I would have gone to my leader, which is great, right? We're not saying coaching should in any way.
It doesn't replace
your leader, but it's an additional resource. And we know that God bless some leaders are burnt out. I don't know, you've probably seen all these recent studies, like you name it, Person or McKinsey or DDI or Qualtrics.
I just read a report put out by Humu last night, and it's not good on managers right now. They are not in a good place.
Right. And their retention is much less likely, right? The current turnover is high, and what they're saying their anticipated turnover is even higher. Exactly. So now these people who are, really challenged and struggling, now you've got leader turnover. So now I don't have that leader, maybe consistency to go to. So just it becomes this, kind of a vicious cycle. So
it's a vicious cycle.
A really, really good resource for employees and those leaders who are struggling.
Well, and I mean, again, we could probably have an entire another episode just talking about the importance and impact of managers and the destruction that happens when you lose your managers and they leave, and the disruption to the team and perform. I mean, it's like, again, we don't need to go there, but I think that point of it's not a replacement for the manager relationship, but it can dramatically reduce the burden that the leaders are carrying to say, hey, there's something that you can help push your workforce to as an augmentation, not a replacement.
Exactly.
This replaces your job. No, but what this does is this allows you to say, hey, I think this is something you really need additional support on. And you can get that instead of going, good grief, I've got to be your coach. I've got to be your mentor. I've got to be your boss. I've got to also do all my own work. That's a lot, especially if you've got any size team.
Well, and it's interesting too, kind of coming back to that is where, it's traditionally definitely a supplement too. But then I was noticing, and I'm terrible with remembering the number at the top of my head, but Gartner had a recent survey research report, right, for their predictions. And I believe it was by 2024, they were predicting something like 30% of corporate teams will not have a direct manager. They'll be an agile hybrid project teams. So to me, that's even
and they're going to come
reason,
together quick. They're going to snap. I know.
Right? And so that really puts everyone in a place of needing to be their best self, to perform their best, to be productive, to think about how do I grow as a person? How do I perform as a leader? Because then leadership, especially in that model, is not about the position. It truly is, how do I show up in this agile team? And if I don't have a standard manager, I'm leaning into my team, but now I can also lean into my coach. So it's just another way that I see, gosh, that's such a huge transformation to think of people not having managers. Or I know one of your previous talks talked about, more skill-based versus role-based. So as we lean into all these complicating factors of what the future of work looks like, that personalized development and support, I think, is just going to become increasingly important.
Yeah, it's not, I think sometimes people look at some of this stuff and they go, oh, well, is this just the trend for 2022? And I'm like, this isn't the trend. Because if you think about it, and then Rudy, I am going to ask you a question because I promised that I would. But coaching has not, you look at the trajectory of coaching. Nobody's ever gone, coaching's kind of a thing from the past. We don't really do that anymore. That's such no, that's always been kind of held as, whoa, this is the apex of personalization and development. That trend hasn't gone away. It's just what we're doing now is saying that doesn't have to be limited to a microcosm of the organization, which that's not gonna go anywhere. That's not gonna go anywhere.
Right. So that's why scale is so important, right? Oh, sorry.
Well, exactly.
Right. We talk about measurable and scalable, and that's where that scale becomes so important. Yeah. So I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. Because I just don't want to forget on this. But
Rudy.
No, I think that point is huge on the scalability, because that has been one of the biggest limitations. There was cost and scalability of, just good grief, how many people can we do this for? So, and we'll dig into that because I want to talk about some of the considerations. But Rudy's question, and I know because of the back and forth we had before coming. So this is a good question is, okay, what is the difference between coaching and mentoring? Because there is a distinction, and some use the terms interchangeably, but I agree that there is a very big distinction between them. But I'm curious, how do you respond to that? And how does CoachHub think about coaching versus mentoring?
Yeah. So mentoring, I tend to think of as a lot of times it's somebody who's maybe further in their career and they are offering more guidance and sharing lessons learned and their stories. Maybe they have advanced experience, advanced knowledge, and they're actually kind of imparting that, right? More than coaching, where coaching is more of a conversation with really powerful questions of helping people find their own answers, noticing what's there, shifting their perception and their mindset on things. And I would say the other thing too, because I want to go back to mentoring for a second, is the other hot thing with mentoring, right, is reverse mentoring. It's a two-way street of people that in different maybe stages of their career, different experience, really kind of teaching and sharing knowledge and experiences in a different way, where coaching really is having a professional certified coach who understands, the psychology of coaching, the techniques around good coaching, asking powerful questions, holding them accountable, and where the coachee's really driving what their goals are in the conversation. kind of their agenda. Does that make sense? Does that help?
No, it does. It does. And hopefully, Rudy, that answers your question, because I'll layer a little bit on there from how I've kind of thought about it. And I'm curious your response. But I think it's an important distinction, because there are mentoring platforms out there as well.
Absolutely.
And I see the two get confused, where they go, oh, no, we're doing this. And it's like, okay, there's a difference between a platform that's trying to connect mentors with each other versus trying to set people up with coaching and things like that. Because to me, one of the big differentiators is with mentoring, you're looking for a SME in whatever it is you're trying to do, because this person has walked the path and that could be anything. It's not necessarily, oh, they're more senior in the organization. It's like, well, they may just be further along in their skill set. They've walked the road, and you're looking to them to say, what is the road that I can expect? Like, what am I going to run into? Things like that. Like, what did you hit? Things like that. Versus a coach, they may have no clue any of the subject matter expertise, and that's not relevant, because it's like, well, no, my job's not to tell you what to look out for, what to do, what you can expect, but to help draw out that in you and help you figure out what that journey should look like for you, which I think goes back to that personalization piece.
Yeah, I would 100% agree.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about this, because we will run out of time if we don't get to this piece of it, because I've got way more questions than I'm going to fit in 15 minutes, but that's fine. When we talk about the considerations piece, I think, we talked early about some of the ones going into it, which I'm trying to think, Kim brought this up earlier, and I'll bring this one back into the stream, that when she was in her org and they first started talking about coaching, she had kind of this like, oh, it wasn't a positive. So we talked about that earlier, that, hey, if you're considering coaching, one, there's this messaging. But what other considerations when you work with orgs who are looking at saying, hey, you know what, we actually want to take this coaching thing seriously? What are some of the considerations that they need to make to make it a success, or at least get the most out of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is, not surprising, is start with the end in mind, right? What is your organizational goal? What is your culture? What's important to you? What are you trying to get to, right? And what's the from to state? And then who do you need to help the organization get there? What is it you're trying to implement or to change within the organization? Then figuring out, well, who do we need to coach, right? Who is the audience? So it might be like, if your use cases, we really need to have a stronger leadership pool or pipeline. If it's, we need to improve inclusive leadership or diversity inclusion, or we need people to be more well so that they get to show up as a more whole, healthy person at work and be more productive, right? Whatever that use case is, to me, is really what's going to inform, where do you start? Who do you start with? And then figuring out, okay, where do we want to start in terms of, then communicating it, helping them get acclimated to what coaching is, and getting them started.
So on that one, because one of the questions or one of the comments, and Pamela, we'll talk about this a little bit more. I'm curious on this because the reaction, and I think some of this is just legacy response because of what especially senior leaders may associate when they think of coaching, is this, oh, it's way too expensive. It's not going to scale. It's not something we can do. How do organizations that you work with typically go about this? Do they go big and go enterprise? Because we talked about before we went live, anybody who says, what's the ROI on coaching, to me is, well, it's all the things. Like all the things will go up. All the things. I've seen it time after time. Nobody's ever gone, well, that was a giant waste of time, unless they're doing it wrong. If you do it wrong, that's one thing. But I'm curious, do organizations come in typically and say, hey, let's go big enterprise? Or to your point of starting with the end in mind, is it, hey, we've got this, yes, we want to potentially get to that point, but we want to start here because we know this is one of our biggest pain points, and let's prove it out and then expand. How are orgs typically doing it?
Sure. Yeah, I'd say I'd seen it both ways, right? But typically, because the reality is we all have budgets, We all have accountability and stories we need to tell back to our leaders or the board or whoever it is, right? Of here's what we tried, here's what we did, here's the outcome. So it's not unusual to see a company say, you know what, we've got maybe 2 or 3 different use cases where we'd really like to start. Let's do a proof of concept. Maybe we work with 50 leaders or 100 or 200 leaders in one particular, kind of sweet spot, or maybe multiple ways they want to use it. And then try it out, see how it goes. And then they see the, results of everything that we measure, things like, the coaching relationship and goals met by the coachees, and a whole host of metrics that we can do. But we also partner with our customers of, well, what metrics do you want to pay attention to? What's important to you? If this goes
so that's part of the onboarding process.
Exactly. Yeah. The whole co-creation with our clients of figuring out, what do you want to see change? And so that's a great way to test it with, a few different proof of concepts, see then how those things start to change over time, see what the feedback is, do focus groups, right? We can come up with a number of measures that help the organization, really solidify, yep, this is a smart investment. This is what we want to continue to do, not only with our, proof of concept folks, but we want to then expand it into, broader audiences.
Okay. Got it. Well, and I think, again, I've seen, it's interesting hearing how, you see it way more frequently because you're working with all these folks, but every once in a while I've seen it where an org just goes big on it.
Absolutely.
They get it and they just go, you know what, we're pulling out the stops because we just know this is that important. But I think for folks, because Pamela shared, she said, the cost and scalability are 2 of the biggest roadblocks she's run into. And I think that point of, well, if that is a barrier, something you're running into, being able to hone this in and say, where is a major pain point that we think if we can solve this or measurably improve that, we can get the momentum we need to actually then be able to scale this up. Is that a reasonable approach?
It is. And I would say, to your point, as we do see others go, right, kind of larger enterprise, we're going to go all in and do this.
Probably more now than we did a few years ago.
And we highly recommend that, right? That can be very successful. And you're going to see, that real shift, that tidal wave, right? Quicker, and, see some real impact. So it doesn't make either approach wrong. It just depends on, what it is you're trying to accomplish.
You're trying to do.
Yeah. And we can go either way.
Okay. And then, so are there any other ones, because one I was curious about is in terms of kind of the approach for this. I've seen orgs have a lot of success because again, the stigma can exist. And I know I actually talked to an org recently where one of the ways they started this with, they started with the senior leadership team so that it was like, it's okay. And I think actually somebody commented on this. Ethan shared it. The messaging from the CEO and COO was, it's okay. And I've seen that work very well when it's, hey, I'm not, and I think of the hair club for men, right? Which clearly I'm not part of, but it's like, I'm not only the spokesperson, but I'm also a customer. That component helps send that message. So I'm curious, are there best practices that you've seen for orgs to say, hey, this actually really helps get people over the hump or make time commitment? Because I think the other thing that I could see being a barrier is people's willingness to find time. I mean, do they prioritize it? So I'm curious on that end.
Yeah, it's a great question. I love your reference to the hair club for men. I think we're showing our age, Christopher. That's great. I love it. I remember those commercials. But I love that you're bringing that out. And I think, I can't remember who you said just commented on that. It's a really, really best practice is have those people who are, thank you, Ethan, those folks who are revered in the organization. They're seen as an exemplar, right, of what goodness looks like to lead or, to live the values of your organization. Have those people talk about, I have a coach and here's how it's impacted me. Here's all the things that I learned. Here's the ways I tripped up. And also, right, set that tone of psychological safety and vulnerability, not just the good stories, but, hey, I really had a hard time. I worked through it with my coach and here's how it turned out, what I learned, and really make it safe for people to understand that even your top performers, right, even your top leaders, they have struggles, they have challenges, they need help too, but have them, I think of it as kind of the Amazon effect, right? Of, 5-star rating and all of the little reviews.
Yeah.
That's where people have, that's where they're going to listen to those people tell their stories and their experiences. So I think that that's a really great call out. Think other things would be, again, going back to really good change management, understanding, even like when I do good change management, or I hope it's good, I like to go out and really hope it is. I try to understand, right, who are the stakeholders? What is their perception today, right? Not make assumptions about their perception, but that perception could vary by level, location, country, right? We're a global company. We're offering coaching in, gosh, what is it? Like 70 something countries, I think. Well, it could be different in the US versus, somewhere else. Their perception of coaching, what it is, what it's good for. So I think it's really important as you're rolling out, be careful about making assumptions, especially in a global rollout. Know your audience.
I was just going to say, especially for global companies where you might operate out of, well, this is how we're approaching it. And that may be fine for where you are. But if you're rolling this to a different region, you're going to Europe or JPAC or, you can't just go, well, this is what we're doing, and this is exactly how we're going to approach it across the org.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I was, and now I think I totally just lost what I was going to say on that, because as you were talking about it, that point of this change management and just best practices, I think it's really important that, especially for learning and HR leaders on the front of this, really making sure that you're pushing some of this as part of that. I remember one instance, just a story I had was, I had a leader a while back who wanted to roll out a coaching program. And when we dug into it, this individual was said, but not for me or my leadership team. It's for everyone else. And I killed it. I'm like, no way. If that's your view on this already, it's going to stink up the whole process, because your attitude is, yeah, they need it and I don't. And that they're going to see this. They're going to see it right through you. So I think really that making sure people understand this is a good thing. This is for your benefit. This is to make you the best version of you is key to help people get on board.
Right. And I think helping people understand that it truly is a whole person approach, right? There's this balance between, yes, you need to be paying attention and aligning to your organizational goals, maybe your annual goals, the development, feedback you're getting on the job, but it's also about, to your point, right? How can I be a better employee, a better leader, a better person? Everyone I know, quite honestly, that's ever had quality coaching has come back and said, you know what, I am better at my job, or I performed better, and I'm a better husband, wife, daughter, spouse, parent, whatever it is, because we bring our whole selves to work, right? We don't just, pack it up in a box, but that coaching experience helps us with our overall wellness and our overall how we're showing up, every day in and out of work.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, and then I'll close, because good grief, I haven't even gotten into there's about 5 other things I want to hit on, but it's fine. It's fine.
I have so much more I'd love to share too.
I know. We like scratch the top of the surface. But on that point, that one of the things I'm really thankful for that came out of this COVID era is the fact that we have had a greater awareness that the whole person matters and you can't compartmentalize it.
Yeah.
And I think for a long time, people have tried to completely compartmentalize. Well, this is my work self. This is my personal self. And I don't let the lines cross. And we've seen that it's like, man, if one is not good, the other one isn't either. And if we raise the tide on one, the other comes along with it. And I think that value proposition is huge, because if you're better at work, you're better at home. If you're better at home, you're better at work. And all those things just flow together, which I think is something that people are coming around to, that it's like, we can't separate the two. So how do we invest in that? Which gets to the ROI conversation of, you know what, all the things will get better. just all the things. There you go. That's the return on investment.
Engagement, retention.
Right. You pick a thing, it'll go up.
Metrics, we can, And what I will say though, while it is all the things, I really do encourage folks, right, is look at all the things, but even choose the critical few, right? Because otherwise it can be really overwhelming. And that's actually a place I love partnering with my customers, is what are the critical few, right? We're going to measure a ton of stuff for you. We're going to give you a dashboard where you can see all this real time, see all, all sorts of metrics to help you measure success. But what are the critical few you really want to pay attention to? They're going to help you tell the story back to your business. And I think that that's really important. And then, like you said, all the things, when they start seeing that too.
I'm glad that you closed on that distinction, because it is important, because you could go all the things, we'll just watch everything. It's like, well, no, that's not what we're advocating for. But what we're saying is that will come. But to make the most out of it, hone in on a few. So with that, let's end before we just start going somewhere else. This has been a fantastic conversation, Laura. I appreciate you making the time. Hopefully, based on all the comments and everything, hopefully you got something from this. It's helped you think differently about not only, one, is this worthwhile, but how to approach it and make it as successful as possible. And the reality that digital coaching is a thing and it ain't going anywhere. So definitely something to watch. So thank you very much for the time, Laura.
Thank you. It was fun. And I'd encourage folks, if you find me on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out. I'd love to connect. I love to geek out on all these things and keep talking about how the world of work is changing.
All right. Well, have a great weekend, everyone.
Take care.